Greetings and welcome to today's show. My name is Ariella Indigo and I'm your host for Season 2 of the Multidimensional Human Experience Global Summit. So in this season, we're talking, of course, about all things multidimensional and ascension related and how we can advance in our spiritual evolution. And I am hugely excited to share today's interview with you, as I know that probably all of our summit listeners will know my guest today. It's Lee Carroll, who, as you know, is a hugely inspirational figure in the spiritual community and the incredible channeler of Cryon, who, as you know, is a beautiful, incredibly wise and loving angelic being. So apart from being so grateful for the vast amount of channelings and hundreds of free audios made available to the public on Lee's website, on a personal note, I have to say that if it wasn't for Lee, then I'm sure that I would never have understood myself as being an indigo, as in conjunction with his spiritual partner, Jan Tober, who I had the honour of interviewing last season, Lee co-authored 3 books about indigos in the earlier stages of his mission, which were a major catalyst for a worldwide awakening in the spiritual communities about indigos. And on top of that, he's also the author of 14 incredible Cryon books as well. Lee tours all over the world, making Cryon's teachings available to everyone, everywhere. And we are so fortunate to have him share some of his valuable time with us today, sharing his experience with us in this summit. So with that said, I'd like to welcome you to the summit, Lee. Thank you so much for being here.
Ariella, that's great. I am so pleased that we could get together.
Me too, me too. And I know our summit viewers have been looking forward to this one. Okay, awesome.
Yeah, let me just speak to the summit viewers. You're not viewing me, and I'm aware of that. I just don't have the ability at this moment here to do the video as I should, so I apologize for that. But you can put a picture of something up there. Or nothing. It's up to you.
They are looking at your picture and my picture now, Lee, for the next hour. So we will. It's all good.
Get some nature pictures or something. Maybe a chimpanzee.
That could be
make it more interesting. All right.
We're just so grateful to have you in whatever format. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So I know you shared about this many times in the past, but it is a fascinating, fascinating story that you have. May I just ask you to start off by sharing with the viewers a bit about your own awakening journey and how you came to be the channel for Cryon?
It's nice that we have the time for this. It's a long story, and I'll try to make it the shorter one. But what makes it, I would say, poignant is that you have interviewed Jan Tober.
Yes.
So those can go back, if you have the library for that, to check it out. Or if not, maybe you'll interview her again, because she is the one who was the pivotal point. And more than that, without Jan Tober, there would be no Cryon at all. I tell people this all the time. It's important that they understand. But what took place literally was, I'm an engineer. I still am, feel like I am. And the fact was that when I married Jan Tober a long, long time ago, I was not interested in metaphysics at all. None of these things occurred. And it was through Jan that she actually, got me going. I warned her. I said, don't, in our marriage, please leave all of the silly, crazy metaphysical stuff out of my life. And that's, that's another story about how that took place. But through the years, she got me to a psychic, and it was more than a psychic. It was a channeler. And I thought, literally, and please, for viewers, forgive me for this, because I thought this was silly women stuff. And she got me to this channeler. I said, I don't want to go. And she says, well, it's your birthday, so this is what I want you to do. So I said, okay, I'll go. And it was a man. And so that was my first disappointment, that, here's a guy. His name was Frank Alper, and he's deceased now. And he was a wonderful guy, but he was doing strange things. I really felt sorry for him. I thought he was crazy. And I sat in front of him. He did what I do now. So, of course, we're both crazy. I sat in front of him for 40 minutes, and he said all the things he said. Like, I didn't pay attention. I didn't want to. We had a little cassette going. You remember cassettes, Ariel? And
Yes. Yes.
and he said he finished, and I went to lunch with Jan, and that was it. Period. Well, 3 years later, she said, "I've got a psychic I'd like you to go to." And he's also no longer with us, but at that time he was a much younger man than Frank. They were like 40 years apart, and they didn't know each other. I'd never heard of any of them. She said, "It's only a 20-minute reading. Please do it. I would be happy for it." All these are things I do for Jan. As an engineer, I just tolerated it, and I said, "Okay, I'll do your crazy stuff." So I sat in front of this guy, and he looked at me and he said, "Well," he says, "you don't want to be here, do you?" And I thought to myself, wow, he really is psychic. And he said, "Let's just make this really fast." And I said, "I love you already." And so he said, "I have one message." He said, "You don't even have to sit down." He says, "There's a magnetic master named Cryon who's trying to get a hold of you." And that was it. And I mean, he could have said some space creature is trying to find me or something. It would have made no sense at all. It didn't make any sense then. All I could think of, Cryon, didn't sound like an angelic being at all. It sounded like we have a rust preventative spray paint here in the States called Krylon. I thought he was very strange. And after that, and Jan says, "Well, what happened?" And I said, "Spray paint wants to talk to me." And I just made fun of this. I laughed and laughed. Long story short, that message he gave me, I was positive I'd heard before. And so I went and found a tape of the 3 years earlier guy. And right about the 46-minute mark, he said, there's a magnetic master named Cryon trying to get a hold of you. It was, to quote, it was the exact same thing. 3 years apart, two guys, 40 years apart in age, didn't know each other. And to an engineer, I had to find out. I'm a guy who likes puzzles. And this was a multi-dimensional puzzle. It could not happen in linearity. I looked, and I couldn't find the word Cryon anywhere. This was, wow, this had to be maybe 30 years ago now. And what happened was I literally sat down in a chair, and I said, "Okay, whoever you are, if you're there, show me." And he did. And what happened is the first thing, I didn't get messages. I didn't get automatic writing. I got nothing but emotion. He had to crack me open. He had to work with my heart before I ever could channel anything. Every time I sat in that chair, I wept. And I never told Jan for about like 3 or 4 weeks what was taking place. And finally, I told her what was going on, and that started the work very slowly. And this was in '89 that actually I told her, and we began. So this is the short version. There's more. But you can imagine my resistance as an engineer to all of this that happened. And I started channeling things I couldn't know. And this, of course, is one of the litmus tests of whether you're channeling or making it up. And the trip from then has been a loving, beautiful adventure. There's been, difficulties and things that anybody would have with any project of this nature. And of course, I stayed in my engineering business I was an audio engineer in a recording studio, electronics. And I stayed there for maybe 3 years before I realized what I did wasn't helping us all. And so I sold my studio and moved into this full time.
Wow.
That's the short version, Ariella.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Yours is just such an incredible story. And I feel it's such an inspiration to particularly awakening men, I feel. Because of your background, because you were completely closed down to this stuff before, it's so inspiring. And do you feel that this has been part of your mission to inspire the divine masculine to awaken in humanity?
I do. And I could say no, but the evidence is just all around me that there's something here. It's interesting because you're in the UK. There's a list called the Watkins 100. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's published.
Yes, I have.
Published out of the UK. It's supposed to be the 100 most living spiritual influential people on the planet.
Yes.
And most of them are men. Yeah. If you take a look at that. And I've been there now for 4 years, and I still look at that and go, what as the engineer, it's funny. I still have my man brain on, say, what am I doing on this list? And then I realize that indeed what you're saying is true. We have mostly women in our meetings. And and I know why, because women are far more equipped for compassion, raising children, understanding the wisdom of life, all of these things. And men in general, we are what I call nose down, trying our best to make a living to support our families. And these are the things that appear to us later. We got more men coming, but it's a whole different, we call it a whole different paradigm for men to be interested in these things. It takes more to get them convinced. But once they are, boy, you don't go back. The love and the compassion that is felt, the peace, the healing, all of these things that come with it truly are worth it. And we continue to have women mostly, but more men. We had it's interesting where you are in Europe. We almost have half and half, but in the States it's a tough call. We only have about 30%, right. But it's increasing.
Well, this is why I think, one of the reasons why I think that channelers do such incredible service work, because it does give you more of that tangible feel for spirituality, even though some people might have some doubts about it. But I mean, by goodness, the wisdom that you channel through Cryon, it's unmistakable for being proof, as far as I'm concerned, that non-human entities do exist.
Well, I would call the leading edge of a new belief that's coming. And it's not a belief that's going to throw away the church. It's not a belief that's going to take anybody's faith away. It's a belief of that God is bigger than we were told. I mean, that's what I tell people. You don't have to shift gears and be converted from one box to another. This is a very old paradigm that's so linear. You either believe this or not, and if you don't believe the one, you're wrong. What if all of them were in this beautiful bag that says the love of God, and we just have the ability to see it differently because of our cultures, of our teachings, and whether it involves a prophet or it doesn't. I was just in India, where there is no prophet. I mean, they believe in the oneness of all things. And then you go to other places and there are prophets. But the whole thing is that it all leads to a monotheistic earth, this one God. So I think part of the ascension process or the evolution of a multidimensional thinking is that we start to understand, hey, we are okay to love God any way we wish to, and we can find these beautiful truths that are here and have been on this planet forever. No matter what you call yourself, you don't have to drop one thing in order to be another.
Absolutely, love that. And how do you feel that the divine masculine awakening is going in humanity in general? Do you think that is mainly just coming through from the younger generations, or do you sense that older men are going through these awakenings too?
Yeah, there's a lot of young men coming along. However, it's coming through the back door, Ariella, and I'll tell you how I know this, because we're starting to see I would say a growing influence in business management, and also those who advise corporations, where they're starting to call it conscious management. And they're starting to be, I would say, a whole different way of working sales and promotion, so that people are helped. There's a conscious action. They call it compassionate action. You'd be surprised at how many business consultants are starting to do this. And these are good metaphysical men, but not just because they believe in metaphysics or multidimensional things, or even they're spiritual. They're just starting to evolve into a basic truth that we're going to do better in business, mostly run by men, and politics, mostly run by men at this moment. We're going to do better if we change our consciousness to allow certain things that people are seeing that work. One of the things that starts to work in politics that we haven't seen yet, but we're going to, that is where we stop yelling at each other and calling each other names, and there's a consciousness that is honoring of the other candidates or the other parties. This is yet to come, but Brian says it's coming. And he says, when you see it in both our countries, when you start to see it, you'll know. Because we have a history of winner takes all, opposition, fighting, all of that. Our politics is just filled with this kind of old energy. And when it starts to be different and starts to come together, and Christ says, you're going to see it sooner than you think, you will know that there is a consciousness that's starting to change. Almost all of that is going to involve a group of about 80% of men. So that's when I say it's coming in the back door. I think that's where you're going to see it first.
I can't wait for that day. I mean, you can see the changes starting to happen now, but it's so exciting what we have in front of us.
I think so too. And you're right. You're going to see younger men are going to get it first. But what is eventually going to happen is that you're going to be faced with a new paradigm of how this works and an old paradigm right next to each other. And you will start to see the one will just hit you in the face. It's going to be so old and ugly. And the other one is going to say, wow, this is refreshing. So you're going to want to vote for the refreshing guy or gal. Or you're going to want to do business with a company that's a lot more concerned about humans and green things and this kind of thing. So it's actually already started. It's a slow consciousness shift with humanity. It's going to take generations. This is no flashbulb that's going to go off where everybody's going to start thinking different.
And I'm very intrigued about your appearances at the UN, Lee. Can we speak about that? Because that's incredible. And I know you've been invited back multiple times. So the reaction was obviously good. Can you tell us a bit about what you were doing there and how it all went? I
still can't believe I went. This started early in my career. I think it was only a few years after I started channeling, where in our town of Indianapolis, Indiana, we had a committee from the United Nations. One of their groups was there. I'll explain that to you in a moment. And they were checking me out to see if I could be invited. And that was the beginning of, I think, 7 visits. I think it was 7 visits. I'm not a traveler. I wasn't then. I am now. But when it started, I hadn't even traveled in my own country.
Right.
And I was in Indianapolis, halfway across the country, and I thought that was a big deal. And they invited me to New York City. It was the first time that I'd ever been to New York when I went, and it was different. I'm from the West Coast, and so you probably know it's like a whole different culture there. So it was startling for me and all that. But the UN is interesting. It has a whole different group of organizations that are cultural. This one, Society of Enlightenment and Transformation, was a place where metaphysics could be talked about. And you could talk about anything. You could talk about ETs and aliens, whatever. So they were honoring different cultural groups. And there's a lot of them in the UN, and they are part of the wouldn't say not what happens in the grand chamber there in the central place where you see all the people pounding shoes and and arguing with each other. This is different. However, it's private. Only delegates and guests and employees of the UN can attend. So when I started off, I remember we were in Committee Room 6 where they had just signed a peace treaty in the Bosnian War, and they were very excited. We walked right in there, and I channeled. And only delegates and the employees were there, and I recognized a couple of them because I had seen pictures. So they were actually listening. One of them, a big old Russian guy that came up later and hugged me. I'll never forget that. And so it became a regular thing. So I went again a number of years. And the last time, I think it was 2009, I think it was the last invitation. And then the club's management, the culture club that was there, the Society of Enlightenment, their president moved on. So I haven't been invited because I think that changed. It was just a period of time that was perfect for me to go. And what happened there is Cryon channeled just very basic things. And the wisdom of coming out of war, and it's the kind of thing that maybe they're still on my website. If you go and listen, you'll see. But it was very special for me. It wasn't a cast of thousands. I think the room only held about 40 or 50 people, but they were delegates of the UN. So it was exciting.
Absolutely astonishing. I just think that is so amazing. You're a man who is here on just such an incredible mission. I mean, it's
You know, I can tell the listeners now, I'm not sure if you'll just let me tell you something that's available. On my website, I have recorded for the last decade or so every single channel that Cryan has done anywhere, even in the bush. I mean, we on batteries. And these are available for free. I mean, really for free. You don't have to leave your email or anything. You just go and listen. We're all over YouTube, but the YouTube thing is not something we do. We don't post any channels on the YouTube at all. That's everybody else. And they're all over the place. And some of them are mislabeled and crazy stuff. If you really want to hear what has happened with the Cryan channelings, cryan.com/free audio will give you a page where these hundreds of channels are all listed by year and name and category, and you can see that sometimes there's as many as 8 that will happen in one country, and they're all hooked to each other. So if you find them on YouTube, you never hear the others around it. They may be standalone and not understandable. So please go to my site, cryan.com/free audio, and you'll find them all, and you can download them, listen to them, and as I say, they go back at least 10 years, so there's hundreds of them now.
And I'm also going to put a link to that website, Lee, on the email when I send it to the viewers today, just to give them really easy access, because it is just a huge library of channelings there. Thank you so much for making
You're
that
welcome.
To us. So with Cryan then, is Cryan, how do you see your connection to Cryan? Is it through a soul contract? Do you see him as an aspect of your higher self? What's your understanding?
These are really good questions, and they have to do with some misunderstandings and some paradigm shift that's even happening now. These are the things I've asked repeatedly. First of all, who is Cryan? That's a very good question there. People ask that. It's an angelic feeling, never been human. I'm channeling information from the other side of the veil from one of the most loving sources, and consistently for almost 30 years. The same information, the same love. If you go to my, there's also a site I have, cryan.com/channeling, I think. It's written channels. So if people don't want to listen, they can read them. And at the end of that, right at the very end of, if you scroll down, you'll find something I found out, an article that I found years ago before I started channeling. I think it was in '87 during the harmonic convergence, where they gave the rules of how you know a channel is real. And they're very interesting, because a channel will never ask you to do something out of integrity. A channel will never channel something that's doom. A channel will never give you information that frightens you. There will be no fear-based. It's so interesting, because that is the earmark of channel. And what I have had all of these years from Cryan. So Cryan feels like an angelic entity to me, and Cryan is here for the shift. That's the whole thing that's happened in the paradigms and that's gone on since 2012. As far as my contract, Cryan makes it clear. On the other side of the veil, we have potentials. We don't have contracts. A contract is a linear thing that we think of here on Earth, where we sign on the dotted line and we do it no matter what. You know, we're indebted to it. And Cryan says it's a potential. It's invisible ink. You can follow it or not. That's free choice. So nobody is hooked into that contract. I have people who ask me all the time, I don't think I've done my contract. I feel bad. I feel guilty. And I say, well, you feel guilty because that's what you're taught here, you know, on this planet to do, is be fearful and guilty. There is no guilt on this. Even if you don't feel that you've done what you thought you were supposed to do, this is something we have the ability to change completely. So, for instance, I had no metaphysical training, not really that kind of a spiritual guy, engineering, and then I got to see something that was startling. I got to see something that worked, and it was spiritual. And over a period of years, this became who I was. It didn't happen overnight. And so, if you think, well, it wasn't your contract, it was a potential. The other potential was meeting Jan falling in love and marrying her. Now, I'm no longer married to Jan, but we have one of the best relationships. I teach this is possible too, even with your ex. It really works, and we see each other constantly. And so without her, this wouldn't have happened. So the contract was part meeting her, was being married to her, was having her influence in all of this and kickstarting this that then was a potential for me. So yeah, I look back and I see it as who I am, as a potential. I can't even imagine being who I was. But this is something you'll also hear from others. You interviewed Prageet Harris, I believe.
Yes, yes.
And Prageet, who built Stargate just out of the blue, this thing that it just emanates energy. He's got to see it to believe it. And he'll tell you the same story. He was in corporate. And then one day he woke up and said, hey, this isn't me. So he had a potential. Whether it was his contract or not, or whether or not, what would happen if he didn't do it, somebody else would have. And this is the beauty. Cryan even told me that. I asked once, if I hadn't done this, what would have happened on the planet? And he said, don't get full of yourself. Somebody else would have done it. So I like that.
Love that.
Yeah.
So what is your connection then to Cryan?
Well, can I tell you that when I started, it was just what you would imagine a channeler does. You sit down and you call in the channel, and you rearrange the biology you have. You have to wait a while, you have to breathe differently, you have to clear your head, you have to do all of these things. And then in my case, in came these messages, which I don't think I delivered very well. I did my best, but it was just not me. It was a human trying to interpret something. It was not a human.
Yeah.
Over the years, there was a meld that happened. I just remember about 6-7 years ago when Cryan says, are you ready for the next step? Well, I'd been doing it, for 20 years and I felt I kind of knew where I was. And I said, there's another step. and Cryan said, yeah. And I'll admit, part of me was going, dang, I thought I was at the top of the ladder. I didn't think that there was more steps. And Cryan said, yeah. He said, you got to stop playing church. And I said, okay. I said, what does that mean? He says, well, it's like you report to the chair and there's Cryan, and then you get out of the chair and Cryan's not there anymore. And he says, it's like anybody, you live your life, and on Sundays you report to the building and worship, and then you leave. And you even dress for it. And I got, my, that's right. That's exactly what I've been doing. And I said, isn't that correct? And Cryan said, he said, let me give you an option. And I said, what is it? He says, what if it was 24/7?
Wow.
What if I'm always with you? What if all of the teachings are always there? What if you don't dress for the part? What if you don't report to a building or a chair? And so anytime you can have access to the beautiful. And I said, wow, is that really possible? And Cryan said, let's do it. So it took about a year, but now there's a complete and total meld. And it made a total difference in my life. And so that's what I teach now. I said, we've got to get into this multi-dimensional feeling where we're connected. Now, you want to call it your higher self? That's fine. Whatever it is that you feel that is inside you, which is God, we call it the higher self. Connect with it 24/7. So every single moment, that is the feeling that you're after. Whether you're in traffic and you're having trouble, or you're in a puzzle, it's a relationship or whatever, it doesn't stop. This is going to give you wisdom to get through these things and be peaceful. And that's the teaching. That's the teaching of Cryan, especially during this shift that we're going on. So that's how the relationship is now.
It's just like a oneness then, basically.
I have to tell you, Ariella, that full circle, when I went to India in November, first time, and realized that all of these people, we've got a fifth of the world's population living in about a sixth of the area of the earth. They're all very, very crowded together. And so you've got all of them believing in past lives, in karma, in astrology, and all these things. Here we are. We are actually the minority on the planet. When I say we, this culture we have, you and I have, and the listeners, most of the planet, so almost 50% or more, will automatically believe in these things. It's the original belief system of the planet. It just got changed. And when I went there and realized, I said, what do you really believe? And they said, well, it looks like we've got a lot of gods and all this, but they're just helpers, like saints in the Catholic Church. He says, we believe in one God. He says, we believe in the oneness of the one God and the oneness of all things. And I said, well, how many gods do you really have? And he said, about 7 billion.
Oh.
I said, what? And he said, every single human being is a God.
Oh, nice.
The Maste is the God in you greets the God in me. And he says, that is what we believe. There is a oneness in all things. I went to one temple where I'll never forget it. On every pillar represented one of the major religions of the planet. There was pictures of Jesus there. There was Muhammad was there. There was just all of these. And they're the pillars that hold up their temple. This is, I mean, they really do believe in the oneness of all things. Now, Hinduism is not for me. I'm just not in my culture. But boy, when you start to look at what they tell you, what they say, in a very gentle way, that's what I believe. And so that's what I strive for. It truly is the oneness of all things.
And out of all of the incredible teachings that Cryon has brought through over the years, do you have any favourites, if you like? What would have been the most valuable teachings, either in your own life that have impacted your own life, or maybe other people's that you witnessed? Can you share a bit of that?
Yeah, and it's I don't know how I would list it. The greatest teaching, yeah, for me, the greatest teaching was that we have completely and totally, as human beings, linearized and humanized God. The Greeks were great at it. They made their gods dysfunctional. We've done the same thing. I don't want to make anybody wrong here, and I'm very careful about this because I don't want to criticize anyone, but the idea that the creator of the universe and all of the glory and the oneness of love that is beyond anything we can ever imagine would come down and then decide that if we didn't do something correctly, there would be a punishment that is so much more horrible than anything we would ever do to our children. So you have a judgmental God. You've got a picture of wars in heaven, which created a devil. All of these things, it's mythology at its grandest. And if people cannot see that, it's only because they've been trained out of it. But if you take a look at it, is that really what God would do? Is there the idea of a war in heaven? That is just so ridiculous. That is laughable. And the idea that then God would then judge you and send you to be suffering for eternity is also, it's what we've done is we've made God a bad daddy. And it's so obvious that this is humanization of God. We've humanized God. It's something that if we stop that, we realize there is no judgment. We are not going to be suffering. What God really, if you want to say even wants, is for us to love him, her. The source is in us, to be one with this source and get out of guilt and lack of self-worth is almost all has come from in our culture, the teaching that if you're not careful, God will do you in. And when I really understood this and really realized what God was, God, the creative source, spirit, whatever you want to call this, the creation, is so beautiful and so glorious and is with me and is with you in a way that we're not being taught. That's the multidimensional God. That's the multidimensional human. That's the teaching that actually got me to relax and be able to teach these things. So again, my apologies to any listeners who would find that offensive, or maybe it's part of their belief system. But I just encourage people to use logic, spiritual logic. Do you think God really is that way? And if you say no, it doesn't tear away your religion. It just makes God bigger. So you can keep the love that you have discovered and just expand on it.
Thank you, Lee. That was a beautiful sharing. And I'd like to ask you what you have experienced since 2012 in terms of the shift in consciousness. What have you noticed? Has it, in your experience, have things definitely sped up for us since then?
I'll give you an example I like. Since 2012, there has been a light-dark shift. an actual shift in negative and positive energy. Call it light and dark, call it whatever you want to, especially for old souls, for light workers, for whatever you call your listeners who are trying to walk a path of light. There is a shift, and it's so dramatic. Things are starting to happen that never would have happened before. It's almost like the dark is disappearing. Light is winning. In the States, people look at us and say, well, I don't know what's got going on there, but suddenly the light has been turned on where things that have been going on and happening for years and decades, if not 100 or 200 years, are now coming to light. We talk about the abuse issues. We talk about women's that are now taking their power, all of these things. It's about time. Why didn't it happen before? This is happening right now in a new energy where Klein has said, watch this. He says, there's more. There's a lot more coming. There's a transparency. You're gonna be able to stand in front of somebody and actually feel if they're telling you the truth. There's people can't get away with things anymore. There's no more fence sitting. He said, when everybody can talk to everybody, there can be no secrets. That was his explanation of the website 15 years ago. So this is what is going on. So the answer to your question is there is a light and dark balance that is starting to change. The wind is at our back, according to what Christ says. Can I tell you just one thing, Ariella, that your listeners want to hear? Mm-hmm. And that is this: things that you tried in the past that didn't work, that you might have wanted to write a book or start a healing center or learn something or whatever, and you tried it and it didn't work. Mm. Now it may, and the difference is you tried it too soon. This is the time. But as humans, we don't like to repeat something that didn't work. I mean, you lay your hand on the stove and it burns it. You don't say, well, I'll try it again. And now Christ is saying, try it again. So there is this. This is what I'm seeing. The biggest difference between what's happened then is that there's a big shift going on that is happening. We're starting also to your listeners, if you're a light worker, we're starting also to get higher highs and lower lows. This is all part of an adjustment going on with us. Corporally, conscious is starting to evolve. And so we're starting to experience some interesting things that are just in the interim that will settle down. So there's a lot happening of recalibration.
I've heard Cryon say that before about dusting off the books that didn't go out, and I really listened to that when that came through, and it inspired me actually.
Well, yeah, I mean, your story is something you probably should tell too. Well, why are we talking? Where did you get the idea for this show? Look at all the people you've had on the show. What influence is it having? All of these things in this new energy. And you may be experiencing things that never ever would have worked 10 years ago. But we don't know that unless you could, you're telling me you tried it and it didn't. But this is all absolutely perfect, what you're doing, and the timing is right.
Yeah. Wow. Divine timing. Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
No, I think 10 years ago, I was on a spiritual path, but it wasn't a multidimensional path. That came a bit later. That would have scared the absolute hell out of me, I think, 10 years ago.
One of the big, the multidimensional aspects is what I would call planned luck. We call it synchronicity, where you expect things that are benevolent to happen to you, and you realize later you've actually created them.
Yes. Absolutely.
People will say, wow, are you lucky? And I will just smile and say thank you. But inside I say that luck had nothing to do with it. This is something I expected, and here it came just on time.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you tell us about another civilization that has gone through this shift that we're going through on Earth at the moment?
Well, you can get spooky, and I will. We believe, like so many cultures on this planet, that we were seeded. The creation story was from the Pleiadians of the Seven Sisters. Now we get into things that this is where the listeners start to drop out, because this is what New Age people are often known for, is their connection with ETs. They're not ETs.
Will love this, Lee. They will love this.
Yes. Well, the Pleiadians, according to what Cryon says, is one planet at a time through our galaxy. It's given chance of free choice and an advancement. We just passed ours, and we are now starting into a track that is going to advance our conscious evolution. And it's hard to explain in a very sound bite, but Christ says we came from the Pleiadians. This is a creation story about 100,000 years ago. Science is starting to see some really big anomalies. You might want to look at Greg Braden's new book, Human by Design, which talks about DNA and what happened. The Scientific American has talked about it. They're starting to see it. They can't find a missing link because it's on another planet. And the fun thing about when this first started happening and Brian started channeling it, I, as a puzzle guy, wanted to find out what other cultures had this. And there are so many. When I went to Australia, that's what the Aborigines have believed for 40,000 years. Went to Easter Island, they even have a statue of Pleiadian. Hawaii, that's what they believe it. So this is all over the planet. And so this is what I believe. I believe this is our creation story. So that is a planet that has gone through what we've gone through. And Crime says he's seen this before. He'll be channeling along and he says, you think that I'm kidding you or these things can't happen. I'm just telling you something I've seen before. And that means that's what the Pleiadians went through. Into a graduate planet where consciousness could change physics and all the things that we've been teaching for years. And which, by the way, they believe in India, and they this whole thing about them levitating and all that. I'm not going to say much more than it exists today. So you can see it; it's there, and we're headed for times when consciousness can do things where we won't have disease, and we won't have the planet to rape for resources, and we won't have any of these things because we'll be able to create them. And this is what we believe and is happening. And so I know I'm way ahead of myself, but this is what we're taught. So that is what Cryan talks about when he says he's seen this before on another planet. And then the Pleiadians, they had to have something, they seed them. And there you have the Arcturians and you have the Syrians. And there's a whole list of laundry list of helpers that are probably our seeding grandparents and great-grandparents that have helped us for a long time. But it's a hands-off policy. This is a free choice. They don't come down and help us. They only have been here as a help to seed us. That is such a fascinating story that is becoming science. And again, I encourage people to take a look at Greg Braden's book, Human by Design, because he's a scientist. It starts to tell a story that cooperates with everything we're saying.
He's amazing, Greg Braden. He's doing some incredible work as well. So on that basis, do you consider that everybody is a star seed?
Yes, because we all have 23 chromosome pairs. That is the sign, because the missing link really is we have 23 pairs of chromosomes, unlike the 24 that all mammals below us have. In the chain we're supposed to have come from, the DNA is different. We have actually two sets that melded together and created number 2. This is part of what Greg Braden's book is. So every single human walking this planet right now is part of that seed biology, yes. Now, there are some who have been here a very long time, and just like a school, we learn things, and we graduate, and we keep coming back and keep coming back. So the old souls are probably more aware of this than a new soul would be. But yes, we all have that same potential.
And have you been on other planets, Lee?
Not to my knowledge. I know I have, but that's hidden from us as well. We have an Akash that is the record of who we've been and what we've done that is specific for this planet, and that's what stays on top. I asked Cryan, I said, why can't we remember some of these other places we've come from, because we've had lives on other planets? And Cryan said, do you think that would really help you at this point? And he said, and I said, well, it sure is curious. And he says, that's the problem, because everybody wants to know these things. And the purpose really is what's going on right now with your life, and how can you get through this shift and capture some of this beauty of this seed biology that you have. It doesn't help you to go into all the machinations of where, what, and when. There's a parable he gave some time ago called Jason and the Cave. Jason had a task before him, and he'd get a reward if he did it. He said that there was this cave that had 2 entrances, an in and an out. And it would take him about 15 minutes, and all he had to do was go in and out, and he had 3 hours to do it or something. And he said, no problem. And he went in there, and he was cruising along, and suddenly he saw records of his own past lives. And so he said, well, it won't hurt if I stop to take a look. And he stopped to take a look. The bottom line was he never got out. He's still there. It was so interesting to Jason that he never got out the other end to get on with life. And that's the parable of why some of these things are shielded from us.
And see, I'm a curious one, so I have been curious, when you channel and you quite often say, Cryon is showing me, or no, Cryon says, I'm showing Lee something.
Welcome to multidimensionality. I'll tell you this, Ariella, when I'm channeling,
Yeah.
I step aside. And when I step aside, I'm listening to everything that's going on with my own voice. I do not go away. I'm not taken out. I am there, 100% there. But at that same time, there is a split that goes on. And that split is I'm in another place and Cryon's talking to me personally. And so I have two complete things going on at the same time. Sometimes there's three. And people say, how can this be? Because we're linear. We can't do that. Actually, when in a previous year, I once said, well, I think women can, because that's just because they can talk about several things at the same time. But basically, it's hard for us to listen to two things at the same time, or three things, and actually be cognizant and focusing on all of them. We're very linear in that. So it's a multidimensional aspect of spirit. So you hear it in channeling. Cryon says, well, I'm talking to Lee about something. You'll say, wait a minute, Lee's busy. He's channeling. And that's because I'm split. And this is also, Cryon said, this is a multidimensional aspect that all of you will be aware of gently as you go. It's something, when we start an evolution into multidimensional things, it's a different paradigm of reality. I mean, quantum physicists talk about light. Light is a multidimensional substance, if you want to call it, a particle or a wave or whatever you want to call it, that can be in two places at the same time. And this is basic physics that we've been taught for 30 years. Two places at the same time, one wave or particle of light, two places at the same time. What's that tell you about the possibility of multidimensionality? And we're going there at some point.
Absolutely, we are. That was very much part of my multidimensional awakening, that I started receiving messages about being bilocational and all of this stuff. So yeah, absolutely. And is it a choice, Lee, that you channel with your eyes closed?
No. What happened was early on, because of I'll just tell you the way this worked. All of my life in non-metaphysical things, I saw channelers and I saw weird stuff and I saw spooky people, and I saw them come and they were going to channel and they were making fools of themselves, totally. They'd jump around and it'd just be awful. And I told Cryon, I said, if I'm going to channel, I don't want to be one of those.
Yeah.
And that was my perception. There's nothing wrong with them. That was just channeling in an older energy looked that way to me as a logical guy with a man brain who wasn't interested in spirituality. And so I said, if I have to do that, I'm not interested. And Cryon says, okay. And I said, also, I don't want to be taken out of my body. I want to be here. I want to watch. Just, that was me saying, I want to be in control. And so the offshoot, Cryon said, okay. And he says, that means you're not going to be standing up, walking around with your eyes open like others. You're going to be sitting in a chair with your eyes shut. And I said, well, what happens if I open my eyes? And he said, well, try it. And so I did 2 times. And what I saw was so distracting, it stopped me from channeling. In order to be there and be present and not be taken out of my body, if I open my eyes, I see every single person's Merkaba. I see them shining. I see patterns. I see colors. And they're so distracting and they're bizarre. And I don't want any part of it. So I keep my eyes very, very shut all the time. And when I have to stand and channel, I usually have to hold on to something. Now, this is in contrast to a couple of my friends. Pragit is one who you talked to, and also Marilyn Harper. If you haven't talked to her yet, she should be on your show. Stand-up channel. Same thing. She was in corporate. She walks around and she does all these things and interfaces with people. And I never will be able to do that. So is it my choice, or is it, the energy of channeling that I selected? And the answer is the latter.
That is fascinating. That is just fascinating. Have you ever channeled any other entities apart from Cryon?
3 times. It was in a Cryon channel when Cryon said, and now we're going to talk to Metatron. I still don't know who this is. And it's only happened 2 times. It was not comfortable. And so unlike, again, Pragit, who can go into many dimensions and have many, and like Marilyn, I have one. I'm okay with one. And those times I channeled Metatron, it was in order to explain something that was physics. You don't want to, something very interesting. I don't know how many of your readers have read a very classic trilogy novel called The Golden Compass. I think that this author was actually reading Cryon, because when it got to the third book, he went into an interdimensional space and the bad guy was called Metatron.
Right.
So, and I went, wow, where'd they get the name? And then I looked at some of the other things and I said, that's a lot like Cryon. And I looked at the date of the writing of it, and it's possible that he was actually looking at some of the Cryon stuff.
Right. So, because when you say Metatron, I think of Archangel Metatron.
Yes, I know. And it's again, isn't that a funny name for an archangel? We're used to archangels having lovely flowery names, and Michelangelo being both male and female. Metatron sounds like some kind of machine.
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
So, for the viewers, I mean, you have been a long time now on your spiritual journey, and like we say, you've inspired many people to awaken. If you could give a message to your younger self, knowing what you know now, having the experience that you've had, what would that message be?
Get out of yourself. Just to truly spend some quiet time. Go into the countryside. This is a lot easier for you to do than for us to do. Our countryside is disappearing. One of the lovely things about Europe, where you live, is it's still there. And to get out there in the wilderness and stay there for a while, to get in touch with something that you're not taught about, an inner self that you have. And if you can do that, it gives you a whole different perspective of what is important and not important in your culture and in your life. And you don't have to be a certain age for this. They used to say, well, that happens at about 40. No, I was in Texas last week, just a few days ago. And I was looking at the demographics of my group, which almost always used to be 45 and under, and it's starting to get younger and younger. And I said, okay, how many of you under 25 are here? And I had 3 raise their hands. They were the under 25 group. And when I talk to them, it's like I'm talking to a very old soul who has been here a lot more years than they have been. Mm-hmm. So I'm starting to see this in young people. They're figuring it out. They're starting to see it. But for the old souls that are here, like you're asking for me and talking to my younger self, things I didn't do, that's what I'd say. I would say Gaia has something for us. All of the ancients knew it. And that is why Gaia was always important. Nature, Mother Earth, was always important in all ceremonies and everything else. We get into a culture where it's just gone. So that would help to reestablish that. And in the reestablishment of it, you start to understand the circle of life. You start to understand yourself better. And you start to relax with what people tell you got to do. You've got to do this here, there. You're going to upwardly mobile. I don't really understand what that means anymore. And you start to realize there is time, and there are answers that go way, way beyond that anything you've ever been given. Being multidimensional means I'm going to find an answer to something that is profound in my life, and I have no idea where it's coming from, who's going to give it to me, but I'm expecting it, and here it comes. And you're almost like you're creating a path and building the road for the answer, and it works.
And on that note, Lee, I would just, on behalf of myself, on behalf of the viewers, thank you so much for spending some time with us, because I know you are a very, very busy man. Thank you so much. This interview has been incredible. I know our viewers are going to absolutely love this, and I have too. Thank you.
It's been a real treat and a pleasure to be talking across the pond and have it so clear. Thank you.
Oh. It's definitely on. I can tick this off of my bucket list now, Lee.
Thank you, dear.
Thank you so much. So, viewers, wow, yes, what an incredible interview we've had for you today. Please do reach out to me. What have been your takeaways from today's interview? There has been so much that's come through, and I know that many of you are huge Lee Carroll and Cryon fans. So it has just been an absolute pleasure and honor to create the space to bring this through. And I thank everybody who has tuned into the interview today to listen to this incredible story and this incredible wisdom. Please join me tomorrow for another amazing interview and more multidimensional conversations and ascension tips and sharings for all of us. Thank you so much. And thank you, Lee, again. Namaste.
Namaste.